Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk called Language Learning Through Work Exchanges. My name is Constanze Baur. I have a handle called This Language Journey on Instagram and YouTube, and I would like to share my experience today on this concept called work exchange and how to leverage that for language learning. Now, if you've never heard of this concept before, then get curious to see what this can do for you. And if you have heard of this before, then I invite you to listen to how you can make the most out of this in terms of actually learning languages, because the main concept behind work exchange is a cultural exchange. Okay, you can also already see there is 3 flags on my globe, which means that we're going to be talking a little bit about these organizations. All right, before we start, maybe 2 sentences about myself. So I am German, but I've lived abroad for about 10, 11 years, and I've spent most of that time either studying or working. But whenever I had the chance, I would go traveling. And throughout these travels, which were often extensive, let's say several months up to a year or 2, I would eventually start doing these so-called work exchanges. Now, in the beginning, I would do them to save money. And slowly over the years, I realized that I could also use them to work on my languages. And this was some sort of a revelation I had, which is why I really would like to share this experience with you. All right, now, first of all, before I explain to you what a work exchange is, picture this. Yeah, it is the fall of 2018. I am being dropped off by a highway bus on the side of the road about 2 hours north of Sao Paulo in Brazil. You can see the scenery, nothing to write home about, but there was this taxi waiting for me that would take me to my host family. Now, my host had arranged this taxi, so I didn't have to do anything. I just sat down and the taxi driver started driving. At this point, I had been in Brazil for exactly 1 week, only using English, doing the touristy things in Rio. And I had been learning Portuguese through Duolingo for about 2 months. Now, the taxi driver, being Brazilian, he really wanted to know what I was doing and wanted to be chatty. And he figured out pretty quickly that I struggled with that. I do know French and Spanish, or I did know French and Spanish at the time. So my understanding was already okay-ish, but I just couldn't respond properly. So I just kept nodding and he kept driving. And at one point, he kept repeating this one word. He kept saying, guarda-chuva, guarda-chuva, guarda-chuva. And I kept looking confused. And he kept pointing at the sky. And it took a while until I realized he was trying to tell me that I better have an umbrella ready because it was starting to rain. Now, this was the moment I realized that I was no longer in a touristy area where I could get around with English, but I was actually in the middle of the country in Brazil needing Portuguese. So the place my taxi driver drove me to was my first, volunteering work exchange in Brazil. You can see this on the picture on the right. It was a small farm run by a Brazilian who had inherited by his parents. And he also had a yoga and meditation center on site. So it was a farm yoga meditation center, retreat center, and they had a small cafe and farm shop. All right, so what did I do there? Why was I there? Well, this was a place where, volunteers would dive in and help out wherever they could, okay? So basically what we're talking about with this so-called work exchange is that you come as a volunteer. I want to stress this is an unpaid experience. You go to a place where you help the host with whatever they need help with, and then in exchange, you get free accommodation and free food, and most importantly, a unique cultural experience. Now, as I said, my Portuguese was very minimal. but I made it clear from the very beginning that I wanted to improve it. This being like an international hosting site meant that there were also other volunteers who were not Brazilian. You can see there's a very small photo there, but basically my two hosts there on the right, they were Brazilian, and then there was 4 volunteers. I was German, the 2 other were from Belgium, and then the guy on the left was from Argentina, but he spoke fluent Portuguese. So basically 3 foreigners not speaking great Portuguese and 3 people speaking fluent Portuguese. Now, I told them right away, I really want to learn Portuguese. And even though we would communicate a lot in English in our day-to-day, whenever I was with somebody who only spoke Portuguese, they really tried to, teach me little words and phrases. And anyway, because I was in a place that was in the middle of, Brazil, with all its, all the things there were so many Portuguese words that I picked up every day. And by that, I mean words like working in the field, we were planting some seedlings and we were feeding the chickens and just digging around the ground, which is why I put the picture in the middle. And, you'd constantly hear the words for plants in Portuguese, the words for tools in Portuguese, because sometimes my hosts also, would just say the word in Portuguese, even though they would explain in English. I would learn what a Portuguese or Brazilian, let's say it like this, kitchen looked like. I have a photo on top right. And what you use for cooking, what things they are. I mean, they were using gas, for example, to cook with, which I'm not so familiar with. They had interesting ways to make coffee. So all of these things had Portuguese names to them. So I would pick them up on a daily basis. And of course, I would also pick up the names for food. Here is a picture of crepioca. If you've heard of this before, it's an omelette made out of egg mixed with tapioca flour. And before that, I didn't even know what tapioca was. That's a starch, in case you don't know it. But so I would constantly pick up Portuguese here and there. Then, because my host also had a meditation center, he would have sort of, sessions on the weekend where people would come and join. You can see the picture on the top left, and those sessions would be fully in Portuguese. We as volunteers were also allowed to join, and that was a great immersion because it was all Portuguese. I had a lot of time to pick up the words. This was in a nice, quiet atmosphere. So I learned lots of meditative Portuguese at this place. Anyway, as I was volunteering in this place, I got really excited about the possibilities of picking up more and more Portuguese. So I decided to go to another place. At the time when I first arrived in Brazil, I hadn't really planned out my itinerary, and I hadn't realized that I would really enjoy learning Portuguese this way. So it was actually at this place that I decided I love the cultural experience and the language learning experience. So I went to another place. I found a screenshot on Workaway where they are listed. And they're calling themselves an unconventional farm focused on experiences and events near Sao Paulo, Brazil. This was another place about 2 hours outside of Sao Paulo. You're seeing a theme here. Most places are in the countryside around Sao Paulo. This was a farm that was focused more on, let's say, events rather than farming. So whereas the other farm really focused a lot on farming, this farm was focused on bringing people together, getting local people together, getting people also from the city to experience the beauty of the countryside. As you can see in the pictures, it's a very beautiful place, lush palm trees, a nice pool, in the middle of nature. And so they invited people to either come and work there. So they had sort of, what would I call it? They would invite companies to go there with the employees for a day or two to have some sort of a workation. And they would, we would help, make the food and serve the food and just maybe, do whatever needed to be done as volunteers to help with these events. They also try to bring local people together. So on the top right, you can see me with 2 other volunteers. We are creating a poster for a local event. And at this event, that was just an event with food and music and dancing for people in the area. So it's a beautiful experience. It was just people coming from the villages around, and we had some artists, musicians playing like all songs, and they were all in Portuguese, and people who came to us would ask questions about the programs and things in Portuguese, and we would just try and figure out how to respond. Anyway, at this place, the group of volunteers was also quite international. So I was with people from Romania, Germany, France, South Africa, and I wouldn't only get to practice Portuguese, but I actually practiced French with the French volunteer. I practiced my Dutch with the girl from South Africa who spoke Afrikaans. So this showed me that, yes, of course, a lot of this is always in English, but you can, practice other languages while you're at it. Okay, so these were my first 2 experiences in Brazil with my very limited Portuguese. Let's fast forward to 1 year later. Now, 1 year later, I had actually come to a point where my Portuguese was quite fluent, however you would like to define this. And I volunteered at a small English language school, again, outside of Sao Paulo, in the countryside. This English school was run by a Brazilian girl my age. You can see her in the top right picture in the very center at the bottom. And she lived with her parents. So even though she spoke very good English, her family didn't and her parents didn't. And this was the place where I was just completely immersed in Portuguese. Excuse me. Okay, so I came there to teach English, but mind you, as a volunteer, teaching English often means that you're there to introduce a culture. You're there to be, an interesting foreigner who brings something new to the regular English class. So I talked a lot to the students about where I was from, my travels, etc. And of course, this part was in English, but everything else other than that was completely in Portuguese. And I really loved this experience because I felt so much part of the family. Like, they invited me to their Sunday barbecues with the extended family that you often get together in Brazil. I was invited to hang out with friends, going for drinks. My host would take me to her yoga class, and everything was in Portuguese. So I was fully immersed in Portuguese at that time, and it was one of my best workaway experiences in using Portuguese. So, like I just mentioned the word workaway already, I would like to briefly mention what you can expect from this sort of work exchange and the different companies there are. Now, I don't really want to promote a specific company, to be honest. I will be talking about the one that I've been using mostly, called Workaway, but I do want to highlight that there's a lot of other companies who do similar things. So, like I said, the company I have used for the past 10 years is called Workaway. This is the company on the top left. You also have other companies. One is called WWOOFING. One is called HelpX. That's the picture at the bottom left. Another one is called WorldPackers, but there are a lot more. And actually, yesterday at 1 p.m., there was a talk in Italian by Giovanna, where she also talked about another program that she's using for these sort of work exchanges and volunteering. And she really goes into depth on how to use her specific website. But it's also a good example if you want to see how to use this program, right? My talk is not exactly about how to use these websites, but more how to use them and what you can expect from language learning at these work exchanges. So just in general, to let you know, these websites, they work in a sense that they bring together hosts and travelers. Okay, both sides usually have a profile, and you present yourself as a traveler wanting to volunteer, and the host presents themselves as the host looking for people. And then your job as a traveler is to contact the host and see if that works. Sometimes hosts also contact travelers, because at least on Workaway, you can like post that you're traveling in a certain area, and then hosts who are looking for volunteers, they can find you and connect with you as well. I would say 70% of the time I would reach out to hosts, and maybe 30% of the time hosts would reach out to me. Now, these websites, they are usually paid websites, so you have to pay like an annual fee or a monthly fee. Again, this differs per page, and also by the time you sign up, like I signed up to Workaway 10 years ago, and I'm still paying the price from then. I think they have raised the price by then, but I think it's fair for what you get. Now, out of these 4 websites, WWOOFING, the one on the top right, focuses mostly on farming. And if you purchase a membership through them, then this membership is only for one specific country. Whereas with the other platforms, you can actually travel the whole world and choose whichever country you would like. Now, just as a small, I have like 2 slides with what Workaway looks like. Like I said, as a traveler, you have a profile, and in this profile, you can list your interests, your languages, and anything else you would like to share with a host. You can share your skills, and because we're talking about volunteering, often, hosts are not looking for people who have like specific professional skills, but rather people are willing to help them with whatever there is to do. But if you are specifically skilled at something, feel free to mention that on your profile. There are also hosts who are specifically looking for people who can help them with marketing or their IT or some construction. And of course, there's also English schools who are happy to have teachers. So this is more the section on the left here with my profile. On the right, you can see a screenshot of a listing of the overview when you find hosts. So let's say you want to go to Italy, you type Italy, and then you get a list with these hosts that you can then contact. Those are like small profiles. You can click on the profile and you can read more about the host, where they will describe where they are, who is hosting, what you can expect work-wise, what the accommodation is like, what the meals are like. They might have some more photos and anything else you might want to know. From Workaway over the years, they have expanded the section quite a bit. So now they also have information on, can you work there as a digital nomad? Is there space for a camper van? How good is the Wi-Fi? What kind of meals, what kind of diet can they cater to? Those are all details. Like I said, that's not the point of my talk today, but just to assure you that you can clarify all of these points before you go. Now here is the overview page. So basically, you usually select a country, and then you can clarify, I don't know, whether you want to find a specific region, a city, or you want to go to farm or whatever. That is up to you. Now, you can see I screenshotted the more drop-down menu here, just to show you that you can also select that you want hosts that are happy to help you with your language practice or that have something to do with teaching. And in general, if you're wondering what kind of hosts you can find, there's a screenshot on the right. You can find NGOs, host families, farms, etc. Okay. I am just seeing a question that I would like to address right now. The question is, how long are the work exchanges on average? Here in the screenshot, you can see there's this tab called availability, and you can find hosts for a certain time span. And then when you click on a host, some hosts will say how long they would like you to stay. And I would say 1 to 2 weeks as a rough answer. Yeah, I have done a work exchange that was 6 weeks. That was the minimum duration. Okay, that was because it was a quite unique place, and the host wanted to make sure that you had enough time to really get the most out of the place. Yeah, in case you're wondering, it was some sort of a somewhat hippie community where we lived without electricity and all things. And that definitely took some time to get used to because it was with lots of people. But I would say, yeah, usually 1 to 2 weeks. It really depends on the host. And I would also encourage you, even if some hosts say minimum stay 2 weeks, I have contacted hosts and said, hey, I only have a week and a half, or only have like 8 days. And then they still accepted me. So I would say that, let's say, if you're a student, this is a great thing to do while you have like your summer break. If you are working, you would probably have to take like a week of vacation for this, unless you have a job where you could do that on the side. I have actually, when I was freelancing, I would do work exchanges and then, do my freelance work in the evening, or when I had my time off, I would actually talk to the host and say, hey, I am working on the side. Will that work? So I think you can also incorporate that if you are working. Yeah. Okay. Now I just actually want to share some voices from other people, because as I was preparing this talk, I was like, oh, I have a lot of stories. Like I said in my description, I've done, I think, 20 of these now, but I don't only want to talk about myself. So I asked around and I asked people that I've met through these work exchanges, and I asked them about their own experience. So I want to present a few of those voices as well, because, yeah, they can share what they think. The first person is actually my old boss. And I got a job in Japan teaching through, Workaway, because I was a volunteer at the language school, and then I got offered a job. So this is also a possibility. Yeah. Like I said, these work exchanges, they're normally unpaid, but this is all changing a little bit. And there might be, or you can now find paid positions as well. Or I know from places that will take you as a volunteer, but there might be possibility to actually get a job out of this, especially if, let's say, you're staying at a hostel or at a school. You never know what life brings, right? So yeah, my boss, Kathy, who is American living in Japan, she actually did Workaway herself. So she's a Workaway host, but she also did Workaway. And she went to Ecuador to learn Spanish. And when I asked her how she chose her host specifically for language learning, she said that she wanted to have a family that didn't speak English. This is my top tip. I mean, maybe that is, logical, but if you find a host who doesn't speak English and who only speaks your target language, that's the best way to go about this. I'll get back to that again, but this is also what she recommends. And also hosts that are flexible about working times. Like I said before, you do have time off. Like normally you work 4 to 5 hours a day on those work exchanges. Can be 3, can be 2, can be 6. Again, you have to talk to the host, and sometimes hosts want you to work only 4 days a week, but a bit longer, and you have 3 days off. It depends. Yeah. I've also had hosts where I only had to help them for 2 hours a day. Yeah. But that means that you can talk to the hosts about integrating maybe a language school study like she did, or work like I did. Okay. Like I said, she also went to a language school, and because the family only spoke Spanish, she was able to really, improve a lot. And her advice for people trying to use Workaway to put a language into practice is to find hosts that are really interesting in sharing their language. you can see that on the profile. Often the families or the hosts, they have long descriptions, and many of them will clearly state that they're very interested in helping with their language. They will say, we are very happy to help you with your French. We are very happy to help you with your Portuguese. That is a great indicator that it's worth contacting this family. Yeah. And she mentioned that it's also not bad to take some time by yourself to study. I often did language study after my regular work hour because you're in the country. It motivates you to also take along a book with you or work on your apps. So that is advice I can share. Okay, I asked 2 more friends. So my friend Rachel from France, we met in Japan at a Workaway. She actually managed, or she's one of the people I know who really got very fluent in Japanese through Workaway. She did spend a whole year in Japan on a working holiday visa and then did Workaway. And she also just said that you really have to integrate yourself, go to places where it's more likely that you speak the language. So, for example, she was at a hostel, she lived with a family, she helped in a dog refuge, and in some other local associations where, you really had to put the language into practice. In terms of advice, she says that, you have to be open to share the culture. You will get to talk about daily life things. And I think that's a really great point. So when you're a tourist, often you will need to speak about the touristy things, like when does the museum open? Where do I buy the ticket? And that's the vocabulary you will be using. But when you do these work exchanges, you will talk about daily life things. You will ask your host, like, I don't know, where's the hairdryer? Or can we make pasta for dinner? Or I don't know, I need to get my laundry done, right? So that will really broaden your vocabulary in that respect. And like she says, sometimes you don't have a choice. You are forced to speak. And this can be a good thing, or I think it's mostly a good thing. You're thrown into, this experience, and you have to figure out how to get along with it. Exactly. So she also says again, like, don't hesitate too much. Try to speak. Don't overthink. Just do it. It's also, maybe that's nice to mention as well, right? These are work exchanges. So you're not signing a contract. If you don't like it, you can leave, right? So you're going there knowing that, you just give it a try and see how it works. Take some time to rest. It's also a nice, piece of advice, because often you're overwhelmed with all the stimuli from all the people around you. But yes, just go to places where you can have lots of new experiences. One of my friends that I met in Brazil at the second farm I introduced you to, she actually went to places that were fully in the local language. So she went to a place where all the volunteers were from Brazil or South America. So there was only Spanish and Portuguese being spoken. And she also stayed with a family that only spoke Spanish. And as you can see, there's a reoccurring theme, right? Is this try to find a place where people only speak the language and where you're just really part of this community and this family, so that you get to practice a lot. And you can have a read a little bit. She also mentioned that she wanted to be forced to speak the language. Like my friend Rachel also said that sometimes we can get too comfortable knowing English. And if the host knows English, it's very tempting to fall back into speaking English. And so either you force yourself to say, hey, I really want to speak the language, or you find a family where you are forced to do so. Okay? These are the two things. And like she said, she struggled to hold herself accountable if somebody's English was better than her target language. So she would deliberately choose places that only the target language was spoken at. Now, I'm saying this because I also want to mention the other side, or the fact that just because you're doing these work exchanges in a foreign country, it doesn't automatically mean that you will learn and speak in your target language. I asked two of my friends who had a bit of a different experience, but also their original motivation was more like, maybe I'm going to pick up something on the go rather than I'm going to this country to learn the language, right? So of course you can do these work exchanges also to just have a cultural experience, and you can also use English. I mean, like I said, I went to one, I stayed for 6 weeks. It was in Chile, but yeah, I only spoke English because that was the nature of this place, and I knew this beforehand. But just, I wanted to show you this, that don't just assume you will pick up the language. Be mindful about whether that might actually work or not. And yes, it can be a side effect, but if you actively work on it, then it will, you'll probably get more out of it. And yes, I want to highlight this on one last example from my side. I tried learning Japanese through Workaway, and the top left, the part that I blurred out a bit, is from my experience that was over 10 years ago. And the bottom right is from my experience last year. And it's with the same family, actually. I revisited them. So you can go back to people. When I first got to this place, I had only learned Japanese for 2 months through an app. And I just assumed that I would pick up the language there. Now, there was a lot of volunteers at this place. I think there was 5 or 6 of us. Nobody spoke Japanese. My host spoke very good English. And the language of communication was English. We did have one point where we'd actually help sell some sweets at a market, and people would come to us, speak Japanese, but it wasn't very busy. We had a list of sentences to say, and we would basically just point and be like, nah. So it was not the best place to learn Japanese. Now, what happened when I came back 10 years later was that, there are only 2 volunteers at the time, so me and another person, and the other person spoke very good Japanese. That's my friend I mentioned a few slides ago. And B, I already had a higher level of my target language. So it was very helpful to pick up more when I already had a level that was not fluent, but conversational. So on my second visit, I realized that it's good if you have, let's say, a very good A2 or a B1, or you feel comfortable using some sentences conversationally, right? Let's not get too hung up on those levels. But if you know nothing, it might be quite hard to really pick up a lot of the language. In my case, in terms of Portuguese, knowing Spanish helped me so much that it did work. But with Japanese, I didn't know any Japanese, and no other language helps you with that. That's why I think I failed the first time, and then the second time was so much more helpful. By the way, Giovanna, I'm going to go back to your question later. So just to summarize again, what are my recommendations on how to find a host? Yeah. Number 1, choose a host who does not speak English. Yeah. Might be hard to read. I had a little screenshot, but in the screenshot, the woman basically says that she's the only person speaking English and all her family only speaks Portuguese. So yeah, this is your chance to throw yourself into this. My second piece of advice would be to choose families with kids. I have a picture on the top right. I was sort of babysitting 2 girls in northern Italy. That was the best place to learn Italian. They taught me so much Italian because they didn't speak a word of English. Their mom didn't speak a word of English. And, playing with kids, you pick up so much daily life vocabulary that, it really, it was excellent. So, even if it's just for a short amount of time, I think that's a great place to go. Other ideas would be hosts that have some sort of local staff. So if you are in Brazil and they have some extra Brazilian staff, that can be very helpful. It can be helpful if you're the only volunteer, because then you'll be more immersed. Or if there's several volunteers, if you can kind of figure out beforehand what language they're speaking, you'll have to check with your host. And maybe hosts that will be integrated, or where you will be integrated in the local community. So if you're working at a school, you will, definitely get in touch with local people. All right. I want to keep some time for questions in the end. I hope this was helpful to you. Now, I would be very interested to hear if you have any further questions about this. So Giovanna is asking, what was the biggest culture shock that you had in Brazil? Okay, it's gonna sound really funny, but Brazilians take like 3 showers a day. I don't know if that's the answer you wanted to hear, but coming from Europe, to me, that was a culture shock. Where my host would constantly be like, we're going out. Okay, let's first all have a shower, and be like, didn't we take a shower like a few hours ago? But other than that, and actually in a positive way, that Brazilians are so welcoming. They're the most welcoming people I've ever had. I've never felt more integrated, where my host literally just took me to hang out with their friends, even though I'd barely met them. Okay, there's lots of questions. Let's go next. Matthew asks, any work exchanges in China? The work exchanges website doesn't come up with any. Interesting. I don't remember having looked up work exchanges in China. China sometimes, as I know, they have different rules. I don't know off the top of my head. You might have to Google. But like I said, there is dozens of these websites. So there's also Facebook groups, which I wouldn't trust as much, because there is no company behind that moderates this, right? Like, the good thing about this platform is that if something goes wrong, you can kind of like flag the host, or sorry if I cannot help more. Vanessa, did you ever have issues with visas, work permits, and other bureaucratic hurdles? And do the agencies provide any support in this regard? Very good question. They don't help you with this. Okay, so you have to find out what visa you need in order to work at a country. Okay, so I did most of this always with like working holiday visas, which I don't know whether you can get those in your country. Sometimes you can be on a student visa and you're allowed to work some hours. If you're in Europe and you're European, you don't need that. So I just make sure that you inform yourself beforehand. It's helpful to contact people who have done that from your own country. Thomas asks, do you always volunteer with what you know how to do, or do they sometimes train you for different tasks that are more technical? Great question. Both. So a lot of the tasks are kind of like easy tasks. So you just do what they want. Other tasks they will teach you. I mean, I've done so much. I would say that usually hosts always check whether you're comfortable with a task. So if the task includes handling like machinery, maybe like a saw or something, you're doing something construction-wise, I would say that usually if you have a good host, they will say, hey, are you okay with doing this? I will show you how to do this safely. And if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it, right? Like, when you have this agreement with the host, they will tell you roughly beforehand what there is to do, but there is no contract that states exactly what tasks you have to do. So if you're not happy to do tasks, you can totally say that. And the host will usually figure out quite quickly what it is that you're able to do. But generally speaking, I've never had a task I wasn't able to do. And hosts often have a lot of experience. I do take hosts that have hosted many people, if I can add this, because that means that they understand how the whole thing works. Okay. But yes, you might be able to pick up some new skills. Like, I learned how to plant seedlings and let them grow, or I learned how to make certain dishes, certain food, or I learned how to, use reservation systems at hostels, things like this. Then there's a question, are there any red flags to look out for when searching for a host? Oh, this is an excellent question. So these websites, they have rating systems. So when you stayed with a host, you can rate them. I want to say that please be careful with this, because I've noticed how volunteers, they either give 5 stars or they don't rate at all. So if a host has a lot of 5 stars, I wouldn't right away assume that they're really 5-star hosts. You have to read a little bit between the lines. I would look out for, we have 4 minutes. If you're a woman, I want to say this, please check. Sometimes there are hosts that are, let's say it's only a male host. And if you see that all of the volunteers were women, I would think about it, and also maybe contact some of them and make sure that it's safe and okay to stay. Okay. So I would always make sure that maybe you're not staying only with one person, that you're staying with several people. I would make sure that you can you can get all the information you need beforehand, so that the host maybe tells you if they have a website, or they give you the right address, they give you all their contact details, they give you their full name so you can find them on Facebook beforehand. So if they're hesitant to do that, if their profile is not complete, so I don't take hosts that only write like 2 sentences in their description. You really want to get a feeling not only of the hard facts, but you want to get a feeling of what kind of person they are. You can read between the lines if a host is like a very warm, welcoming person who's really happy to host you, versus if somebody just says, hey, I'm looking somebody to help me with this job. Because remember, you're mostly not getting paid for this. So you want to make sure that this is a nice cultural experience. Okay. So you want to make sure that the host doesn't only talk about your tasks and your work hours and the facts, but that the host also describes a bit about their life philosophy, what you can do outside of work. So if the host only has hard facts and work details, then they just want you as free labor, and then you shouldn't go. What else? Read the negative comments and also understand that sometimes maybe somebody put 2 stars as a rating. And if you read the comment, please try to understand what they complained about. Because sometimes you have different expectations and you go to host, and then maybe those expectations are not met. I would say you have to be very open-minded when you do this, and don't get discouraged by bad reviews, because sometimes you will figure out that the person who wrote the review was sick, I don't know, had a bad day, had some other problems, right? So read the review with some healthy perspective and reading between the lines. And you can, for example, on Workaway, you can contact the people who went there before. Yes, and just make sure that they don't overwork you. If a host wants you to work more than 6 hours a day, don't go there. If they don't give you proper accommodation, then don't go there. Like with any exchange, try to get a feeling for the person and that there is a good vibe, even though this is through a profile. But that's what I can say. All right, this was the last question. Thank you so much for all the questions that you had. I really hope that you enjoyed this talk. If you have other questions about this topic, feel free to contact me on Instagram or on YouTube. I do post about Workaway and language learning on there as well, and share more experiences. So thank you so much for everyone who's listening. And hope to see some of you during the rest of the Polyglot gathering. Thank you.